Hello? It's on. If I can have your attention, please. We're going to be starting in just a couple of minutes. So if you would find your seats and get comfortable, we'll get started in just a couple minutes. Thank you. ما أطولك مشيتني حافي ميزان ما أتقلك هديت لي كتافي دابت حشيشة قلبي لجلكم دابت والشعرتين السود يا يما بروسنا شابو والشعرتين الشقر يا يما بروسنا دابو فارس يا شمعتي سيل يا مالي
يا مين يجيب الدواء؟ قلت الدواء غالي. فارس يجيب الدواء وسهيل يداويني. لا تحسبون طالت الغربي يا يما ونسيناكو، وكل ما طالت الغربي يا يما تذكرناكو. جمال يا جمال، جمال يا بن عمي، خد لي هالسلام لابوي وامي. سلام من خاطري، كلام من تمي. سلام لأختي الحنوني لبعيدي عني. يا عين حاجيبك، يا عين ظلمتيني. يا عين أخدتي الأحباب وما أعلمتيني. أوه صبرت صبري الخشاب تحت المناشير، صبرت لأنه استوى لحم العصافير. وحياتك تكبر وتجبر والرب يعطيني. جبرة قوية يا يما وتكيد عدويني. يا ابني
شاملي لاليا ويلي لكي شاملي لاليا ويلي لو علي لالي وقولوا لو بتفتح شاملي لاليا ويلي لو واني الليلة لمعت معي الريح الشاملي لالي.
Good evening and blessings to all of you. Let there be peace on earth, and let it begin with me. Let there be peace on earth, a peace that was meant to be. Aha, I knew that you would hear the singing voice. Good evening and welcome to this building, to this space. I am Reverend Weatherly Burkhead Verhelst. It is my blessing to serve as the pastor of one of the congregations which meets in this space, First United Methodist Church of Ferndale. And we in our congregation are thrilled that so many groups have come together to sponsor this event tonight and to come together in this space. And this evening, I hope that you will feel welcome and at home in this place. Practical detail, there are restrooms available on this floor, just down the ramp, which many of you walked up a few minutes ago. There is a unisex restroom, which is barrier-free. There is a men's room just around that corner. And women, because we are so strong, there is a women's room down on the lower floor, which is also accessible by elevator. And I know that there are helpers in the building to help you to access all of those spaces. And thinking of spaces, I'd like to begin this evening by acknowledging that we are standing in a place and a space that was first occupied by others. And I take this language, thankfully, from the Ferndale Community Services site. In humility, we acknowledge the sovereignty of all Indigenous communities, especially the Lummi Nation, on whose ancestral land we live and serve the community. And we give thanks for that space. And as we gather this evening, from many, as over the years, as we have come from many cultures, perhaps speaking many languages, we have come together to call God by many names in many languages. But we come together with one hope as human beings, to live in peace. And the word peace has the connotation of wholeness, unity of spirit and purpose. When we are in conflict with one another, we are not whole. And our hope for peace is rooted in the courage to ask questions, to learn more about our world and all of the fellow human beings with whom we share it. I am thankful that out of the many places that you could have been this evening, that you made it a priority to be here and to come with courage tonight, to learn, to question, to grow, and to be together. And my deepest prayer for all of us is that in our time here this evening, that it will be one more step on a path to peace. You are welcome in this place. And I am delighted to introduce our MC for this evening, Dr. Leila Sachi.
Thank you, Pastor Weatherly. This really has been an epic and extraordinary 3 days of learning, teaching, and collaborating with Professor Ilan Pappe. We started in Dearborn on Monday, May 13th at the Bint Jbeil Cultural Center, where Professors May Saikali and Ilan Pappe give a crowd of over 1,000 attendees an illuminating explanation of past and present Palestine, as well as insight into how to move forward towards a lasting and just peace. Yesterday evening, the First Unitarian Universalist Church of Detroit hosted Professor Pappe, and with a riveting introduction from Dr. Krista Brunn, gave historical and legal justifications for why Zionism is inherently unethical and illegal. For this evening, I'd like to begin by thanking the myriad people and organizations that without their initiative and support, this series would not have been possible. First and foremost, Dr. May Saikli is a Palestinian Nakba survivor. She is an oral historian and professor emeritus, and a dear friend of myself. She was my thesis advisor, and a dear friend of our keynote speaker, Dr. Ilan Pappe. Without her initiative, we would not have been able to bring this illustrious speaker to our metro area. Al-Nadwa is a nonprofit cultural organization with no religious or political affiliations. Al-Nadwa exists to promote and celebrate the human capacity for free thinking, a capacity that has often been restricted in our Arab American communities here in the United States. Al-Nadwa creates a non-discriminatory space for open dialogue and for the promotion of understanding across divisions. We would also like to thank our partners, Jewish Voice for Peace, Peace Action of Michigan, the Palestinian Youth Movement, the International Solidarity Movement, and Friends of Sabeel North America. Finally, I'd like to thank some individuals who have worked tirelessly to bring these events to our metro community. Please stand as I mention your name if you feel comfortable doing so. Barbara Bearfield, Dr. Krista Brunn, Dr. David Pitts, Sir Nabil Satter, Zaina Shaban, Wissam Sharafuddin, and Monir Azarmnia. And I am Leila Sachi. Oh, no. I haven't introduced myself yet. I'm brace yourselves, a philosopher, a historian, a mother, an Iranian, a Muslim, a Canadian, an equestrian, a sister, a farmer, a professor, a wife, and an irrational optimist. But above all, I'm a humanist who transcends national, ethnic, gender, religious, and class divides. A humanist who believes that our individual lives share a strange quality, the quality of being a combination of chance or circumstance and our decisions. For some of you, tonight is going to be kind of like going down that proverbial rabbit hole, because you will be hearing Palestine and Israel discussed in terms and from a point of view that is entirely different from the framing and language you're used to hearing and seeing on mainstream media. And this is a good thing. I ask you to keep an open mind and an open heart for two reasons. First, because we know that we are limited by who we are and our points of view. And moreover,
because our points of view, such as they are constantly manipulated by social media algorithms designed to keep us hooked and coming back for more affirmation. The second reason is because the difference between me here, you there, and Ahmed Ghanim, whose vlogs have recently been made into a documentary, who is in Gaza. The difference between us is a matter of chance. This reality is what connects our humanity and why Palestinians are equally worthy of a life with dignity and freedom. Moreover, as you listen to Professor Pappe this evening, ask yourself, if it were you living under occupation, can you confidently say that you would quietly persevere, as the vast majority of Palestinians have done for the last 76 years? Or would you join the resistance along with members of Hamas? Before introducing our poet, I want to leave you with one important fact. Understanding why something happens or is does not imply that you have to accept it. But understanding why it is imperative for the advancement of knowledge. And it is also imperative for the advancement of peace. So let me repeat again. Understanding why something is does not imply that you accept it. But understanding is necessary for the advancement of peace. So as I mentioned, we will begin with a poetry reading by Dr. Reem Abu Samra, followed by a Nakba commemoration by a survivor of the 1948 Nakba, Dr. Ismail Noor. Then I will introduce a man who needs no introduction, our keynote speaker, Ilan Pappe, Dr. Ilan Pappe, and his talk will be followed by a prayer by Rabbi Alana Alpert. We will also have a 20-minute Q&A following Dr. Pappe's talk, so feel free to come to the mics at either side. Unfortunately, we do have to limit to 20 minutes, so we ask that you try and keep your questions concise so that we can have as many people ask their questions as they want or need. So with no further ado, let me introduce Dr. Reem Abu Samra. Reem is a Muslim, Arab, second-generation Syrian American. She is an activist, college instructor, oral historian, spoken word artist, and a mother to 2 daughters. She started writing poetry in 3rd grade and has been performing spoken word for over 20 years. She has been commissioned to perform at venues such as the Southfield Public Library series, Poets, Pages, and Scribes, the Echo Verse Poetry Series, the U.S. Social Forum when hosted in Detroit in 2010, the Charles H. Wright Museum's Malcolm X Celebration, and Hamtramck's Our City series. Reem has 2 poetry collections that have been published, Fractured, Between Truth and Lies, and Just Enough, available for purchase online. If she is not taking a long walk or hike, stress baking, I can attest is delicious, or sitting in nature, you may see her performing by hitting up a local Metro Detroit open mic. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Reem Abu Samra.
Good evening. I don't plan to do an introduction to my poems, but I'm reading two poems. The first one I wrote in February, so I do want to say that numbers have changed since then. And as I read off numbers, I want to remind you that the Palestinian people are not a statistic, they are not a number, they are humans with souls, with lives, with families, with stories, with dignity. And so I'll say some numbers, but I just want you to remember that the Palestinian people are not just a statistic. I often reflect on permanence, the ultimate power of infinity, a sense of hope in a greater power, the eternity of a deity. But lately, there has been an endlessness of excusing genocide as self-defense, an endlessness of mentally processing 221 days of destruction, 221 days of unshakable faith, 221 days of aggressive bombardment, 221 days of Palestinian strength. The endlessness did not start on October 7th, nor did the rallies, protests, and demands for peace. It has just been broadcast on social media, but for 76 years it was manipulated on radio, print media, and TV. 76 years of colonization, 76 years to liberate, 76 years of stolen land, 76 years of Nakba on the Palestinian state. For years, we have been calling for the world to take a deep look at Zionist ideology leading a Zionist state. Over 35,000 lives taken, over 78,000 injured, millions displaced. This is not accidental, it is strategic, tactical, and governmental. It is easy to unplug and pretend that it's not happening on our end of the world. On our end of the world, and endless scrolling on our phones to witness humanity sold, lives destroyed, cities and buildings floored, starvation and illness rates have soared, constant displacement to safe zones made precarious while under attack, like Khan Yunis and Rafah, like hospitals, schools, churches, and masajid. While we all sit here witnessing all this being sponsored through lobby groups and political campaign dollar bills, through our tax money, complacency, and silence, massacre is made easy, cheap, with no frills. Endless evidence, yet we are still being told fake news by pity campaigns at Super Bowls, 221 days of distraction, 221 days it is never too late, 76 years of occupation, 76 years it is never too late. I often reflect on permanence, the ultimate power of infinity, a sense of hope in a greater power, the eternity of a deity. But lately, I have borne witness to the permanence of Palestinian hope, liberation, community, innovation, faith, determination, strength, salvation. I have borne witness to the permanence of Palestine. So the second poem is kind of like how I've been processing and how I've been physically feeling a little bit. So there's some physicality in it. The pinching in my chest, the fog in my brain, the aches and distress, the inability to process pain, the soreness and twinges, the drooping of my lips, the twitches and flinches that refuse to wane, the impotence of rest, the denial to resist, the temptation of hope and the continual thwart. We will not stop, we will not rest, we will oppose, we will contest. Tightened chest swells with pride, decolonization, resistance, anti-occupation, anti-genocide. We will not stop, we will not rest, we will oppose, we will contest. Shaky hands stilled in grasps, quivering legs step in line, shoulders carry more than slogans, shoulders carry more than signs. Throat is sore, voice is quaking. We will not stop our protest until the earth is shaking. Free the lands from greasy palms of colonial racist capitalists who are dropping bombs. We will not stop. We will not rest. We will oppose. We will contest. Crack the walls, break the chains, open the doors. Cathartic pain attempts to encase, attempts to displace, attempts to trace, attempts to erase, but never will our will be phased. We will not stop. We will not rest. We will oppose. We will contest until the only words that fill the void are whispered calls for حرية, 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 حرية. Thank you.
Who would have thought that Reem is such a tender soul? Can you hear me? All right. She is a tender soul with a clear vision. Next, is my honor to introduce Dr. Ismail Noor. Ismail Noor considers himself a Nakba survivor. He was born in Anabta, Palestine in 1949. He was forced into exile at the age of 17 and embarked on a refugee's journey before settling in Michigan in 1977. Ismail earned his doctorate degree in sociology from Michigan State University and worked for the Children's Trust Fund for the prevention of child abuse and neglect until retired. He later worked for the National Family Safety Program for the prevention of domestic violence at the King Abdul Aziz University in Saudi Arabia for more than 3 years before resigning and returning to Michigan. Throughout his academic and professional career, Ismail has been an active community member and an advocate for human rights and justice for Palestine. As a student, he participated in establishing and serving on the boards of the General Union of Palestine Students and as president of the Greater Lansing Arab American Social Services and other community organizations. Today, he is active in his local United States Palestinian Communities Network chapter and aims to support local community actions and activists in their fight for social justice. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Ismail Noor.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everybody. Yes, I consider myself as a Nakba survivor, although I was born a few months after the Nakba, which means that my mother was carrying me, pregnant with me, before the Nakba. And it is a traditional back home that the child is born and they record his vital information maybe 6 months or a year after the fact. So I am a Nakba survivor. The Nakba is actually the history of the modern Palestine and Palestine people. We used to commemorate the Nakba on this day, which is the 15th, and that is for now 76 years, which is my age. However, the Nakba is not one day. What happened in 1948 is a peak of atrocities, a peak of crimes at the end of a period ended by genocide and all the massacres that they carried against the Palestine people in their towns and their villages. So the Nakba is continuing. It is before 1948. I consider it to be maybe reasonable to say that the Nakba started when the Balfour Declaration was announced and claimed by the British government. So it is this project, the colonial settler project in Palestine, has been in the making for around 200 years, maybe more. And I call it as a colonial settler project because that is what it is. And I have many things to prove that is the truth. Zionism is racism. And that is not what I say, but that is a decision that was taken by the United Nations General Assembly in 1975. And so is colonialism, is racism, and stemmed from racism. So imperialism too. In 1799, all the colonial powers at that time were trying to find a way to get to the region to secure their own interest, regardless of the interest of the people of the region. So we started with France, and France actually conducted a war against Egypt and then tried to invade Palestine itself, but Napoleon was defeated on the wall of Acre at that time. He called, and he was one of the first to call for what they called it a return to the ancestral homeland in Palestine for the people of the faith of Jewish or Jewish faith. So he failed miserably and went back and died in exile. But who picked after that the idea is Britain. And they entertained the idea for a long period of time. In the middle came the United States. In 1848, 100 years before the announcement of the establishment of the Zionist entity in Palestine, the United States Marine sent a delegation, if you will, to explore ways that to help bring back what they called it also people of Jewish faith into Palestine to create a Zionist entity in there. So no one of them is innocent. All of them collaborated on together and on the individual basis to help come to this conclusion. And why is that? Because it is their interest. It is their interest. It is not in the interest of the people of Jewish faith, nor in the interest of the people of the region, nor in the interest of anybody else except the colonial imperial countries in Europe and the United States. So they knew that the Ottoman Empire is about to collapse. They were engaged, again, individually and as a group of countries, of powers, to set the stage for that period of time. So the British government, the foreign secretary of the British government at the time, called for a conference on 1905. And it is called the Imperialist Conference, and referred to it again also as the Campbell-Berryman Conference, lasted from 1905 to 1907. The attendants were all the colonial powers from Europe, 6 countries at the time, and they invited also the Vatican to the meeting. That meeting concluded in a report. It is also referred as Campbell-Berryman report at the time, recommending that or calling for finding a way to not allow the area that is going to be free from the Ottoman Empire occupation, and it was an occupation too. That is the Arab countries, the Arab world at the time, to be united, because they felt that if they are successful to unite in any way or shape, that is the end of the hegemony of Europe and the hegemony of the colonial powers. So that is what they did. In fact, that conference was the base for the Sykes-Picot Agreement, which comes in 1916. And also it was the base for the Balfour Declaration in 1917. Of course, there are so many other conferences came after that, just to legalize the creation of legalize the Balfour Declaration in order to implement that in the future. So some things did not change. The tactics are the same. The actors are the same too. So the tactics is, if something that is not going to be solved by force, you need to employ more force to secure that. And that is what has been implemented in Palestine. So they created, at the turn of the on the eve of the First World War, they created an international body to legitimize Sykes-Picot and to legitimize Balfour Declaration, and that was called the League of Nations. In fact, the League of Nations, the only significance of that League of Nations was to give the British the right to mandate over Palestine. So it is stated there, directly stated, to do what? To implement the Balfour Declaration and to do the Sykes-Picot agreement also between France and Britain. And that is what the British mandate is and was, just to legitimize and work onto the creation of the so-called homeland for the people of Jewish faith. For 30 years almost, the mandate. During that, the British waged so many atrocities, war, genocide against the Palestinians. If they find anybody with a just long knife, they would hang that person. And in fact, they did hang a lot of people, and we know the 3 murders that they were hanged there. At the same time, the British mandate authorities allowed the immigration or the migration from Europe to come into Palestine and allow them to form an army. Not to form an army only, but to give that army weapons and all the means to fight in Palestine against the Palestinians. So they knew ahead of time, from the very first minute, that they decided to create a homeland for the the people of Jewish faith in Palestine. They knew that they are going to be waging ethnic cleansing, as Dr. Pappe referred to, and they knew that they were going to wage war and crimes, atrocities against the people of Palestine, because that is the only way that they will get rid of the inhabitants of Palestine, the people of Palestine, to kick them out. They throw on us a lot, tremendous amounts of lies and fabrications and what have you, including that this land, Palestine, was an empty land. Nobody is living in Palestine. So it is going to be given to a people that has no land. And we didn't know at the time. People thought that this is a lie. I say to you now, it is not a lie. It was a program that they adopted from the very first minute to have Palestine empty of its inhabitants, of the Palestinians. And that is why we say that they committed atrocities, they committed genocides in there, they committed war crimes, and what have you. So here we comes in the late 1940s, after the Second World War, and the programs began to appear in front of the people, and there were calls for the partition of Palestine. Why partition of Palestine? Because they failed to take Palestine all in one shot. So they thought to do it gradually, as part by part. And the United Nations, which replaced the League of Nations, immediately took the idea, and they adopted a resolution to partition Palestine into two countries. And that is the origin of what we now hear every once in a while. Oh, we are with the idea of two-state solution. That is the two-state solution. People thought that George W. Bush, the son, is brilliant, and he came out of this, in this thought to solve the problem. And he was the least intellectual or intelligent president among the presidents of the United States. So this is what it is. They partitioned Palestine in order to create. But Ben-Gurion, who was the first prime minister of the Zionist entity there, found himself in a deep trouble. Because even with the Holocaust in Germany, and Germany did not commit Holocaust only against the people of Jewish faith, they engaged in so many atrocities and genocides in Africa, even in Europe itself. So that is what happened. The Jews did not go to Palestine. Few went there. Even with the agreement between the Zionist German Jewish community in Germany and the Nazi Germany, there was an agreement signed by them that allow the Jews to migrate to Palestine in masses. And even somebody said that they did the Holocaust against those who did not go to Palestine. And we know that most of them ended up in Argentina and South America and Canada and what have you. And even Canada has one one community of that. So what did he do? He committed ethnic cleansing twice. One is against the Arab of Jewish faith in the Arab countries, and then after that against the Palestinians, and before that against the Palestinians too. So they were forced, those Arab Jewish faith people, they were forced to migrate to Palestine. Because otherwise, Ben Gurion would not have the population to support the creation of the Zionist entity in Palestine at the time. So that is by default, they commit suicide. I was giving 5 to 10 minutes, but I feel that I need a month to finish that. So as the British mandate occupation authority used to do in Palestine, whenever the resistance intensified in Palestine, the British authorities come out with what they called it white paper. White paper is a statement from the British government leaning a little bit toward the Palestinians. So they would say in that white paper, for example, oh, we decided to limit the Jewish migration to Palestine. So they would fool the Palestinian inhabitants and people into that. And nowadays, and this is one of the things that did not change, the United States administration, especially Joe Biden, whenever and everyone before him, whenever things are not going in their way, they throw at us the two-state solution. So come back, and we will have to support the two-state solution and so forth. Just that rhetoric, and the United States vetoed the resolution in the Security Council that calls for a state for Palestinians, even on the tiny little bit, 22%, even a little less than that, of the historic Palestine. So they are the same. They were the same before. All of them worked against the will of the people of Palestine and the region, as they did against the will of the people all over the world. And you can pick any country in the world that the imperialist countries, the colonial countries, committed genocides and crimes and atrocities against that particular country. Any country, just pick, blind your eyes and close your eyes and pick. So that is what it happened. For me personally, I opened my eyes as a child on the Nakba people who were refugees at the time. And I can say that I saw in their eyes, I could feel it, that they were trying to hide their faces because their dignity was taken from them. Every month, and every 2 months, maybe every month at the time, the Onorwa people come to my town, erected a huge tent in the middle of the town, so the refugees can come and pick up some of the rations that they supposed to pick up, so they can feed their children and families. And as a child, playing around and going through the tent, I could feel how they shamed of themselves of lying in a line to pick up this ration that is part of what they try to keep them quiet at the time. Up to now, and you can see what's happening in Gaza with the genocide. This is the continuation of genocide. I went through, before Gaza, I went through lots of wars in the region, 1955, 56, 58, 67, 73, and what have you. And it is the same procedure, because the idea is to not let anybody in Palestine of Palestinian origin stay there. They wanted to empty the land. And that is the main objective of the war, or genocidal war on Gaza right now. They did not go there to revenge October 7. They thought that it is the right moment for them to get rid of Gaza and the people of Gaza. Why the people of Gaza? Because 80% of them were refugees, were belonging to towns and cities in Palestine, 1948. So that is what happened. That is what's happening now. Now, and I am one person, and my wife is with me here, glued to the TV every day, every night, because I could not go to sleep without knowing what's going on. And you can see the children, women, elderly, that being forced to move around and from one place to the other under the pretext that this is a secured area, lying to them. They are hungry. They are thirsty. They are being bombarded continuously. With what? With weapons, planes, and material support from the United States of America, the White House, the administration, Joe Biden himself, who said in a videotape that you can find it on the internet, that he was proud to be Zionist, which means he is a racist person, because that is what Zionism is. And he continued that. Listen, I will finish shortly, but I need to explain something with this. He said that if the Zionist entity was not there, we should create it. So that is the first point, that the Zionist entity in Palestine was created. It was not normal. It was not an end of a liberation of people that liberated their countries and have the right to practice self-determination. That's the first point. Then he said it is a cheap investment in there to give them $3 billion a year. So that is the second point. It is an investment for them. And that is why they rushed on October 7, all of them, all the colonial powers, all the imperial powers, they rushed to save their investment in Palestine. Why the investment, he continues, is to secure our own interest in the region. And that's the end of it. This is what is going on in there. Investment, giving them all kind of means of means to secure the interest of the United States. No talking about Palestinians and so forth. The end of it is one more point. I'm sorry. I was I was attending a vigil in downtown Detroit 2 weeks ago. And the three doctors who went to Gaza and came back were giving their impressions and what they saw. And it stuck in my mind one of their stories. And the doctor called it the melting child. And he said, I was at a location, I received a phone call, please come to the hospital right now, leave everything there. So he did. He was specialized in amputation and things like that, with whatever his specialty is. And he said, I found the case that a woman has a child. She was carrying the child on her hand like this, and she was bombed. The woman survived, but the child literally, according to him, melted on her hand. They could not separate the child from the hand. And that is why they called him in there. And he had to do the amputation. And he amputated the hand of the woman with the child so they can bury the child. How could you sleep after hearing such a case? This is what happened. The child was called, the name of the child, Hibatullah, which means in English, a gift of God. And the next day, he went to see how the mother is doing. She smiled at him, and he was puzzled by the smile. She said, you are the doctor that operated on me yesterday. He was afraid to say yes or no because he didn't know what to expect from the woman. But lastly, he said, yes, I am. And could you tell me why are you smiling? She said, I am smiling because that child, Hibatullah, when that child is going to see his God, he will have a piece of me with him, my hand, with that child. That is how the people of Gaza think of the future. And that is why they are just very, very, very much steadfastness against the genocide and supporting the resistance and everything. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Noor. When we were having our meetings to organize this event, one of our organizers suggested that we have a person, a survivor of the Nakba, give a speech because today is the anniversary. And there was discussion around whether we should, how much time we should give for the person to speak. And I said, how can we put a limit? How can we put a limit on someone who's a survivor of any atrocity? How can we put a limit? Because we all benefit. So when somebody who is a survivor comes and speaks, they are reliving their trauma, and that is a gift for us. So thank you, Dr. Noor. So now we move on to our keynote speaker, Dr. Ilan Pappe. a man who needs no introduction, and I'm not going to take any of your time. He can introduce himself quite well through his work and through his talk. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Ilan Pappe.
Okay. Good evening. Good to see you all. Since Dr. Noor covered so succinctly and concisely the history of Palestine leading to the Nakba and the Nakba itself, and since I was already talking in my previous two talks about that history and the connection between that history and what goes on in Gaza, both in terms of the events of the 7th of October and also in terms of the Israeli reaction to those, to the events of the 7th of October, I thought as my last talk, I would focus more on the period leading to the June 67 war, the occupation of the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, because I think we already heard, and I think many of you know that, of course, the atrocities, the colonization, the oppression did not start in 1967, and as we heard so many times today in the previous meetings, it was just another chapter in the colonization of Palestine. Nonetheless, I think it's important to focus also on the period leading to 67, what happened in 67, the whole history of the occupation and its relevance to our time. Because in the minds of many Americans, including those who are genuinely or cynically involved in the so-called peace process, the conflict, as they would call it, started in 1967. And in fact, all the efforts in the last 50 years were to, supposedly, to find a solution for the future of the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, of course, neglecting on purpose the events of 1948, the Palestinian refugees, and issues that did not start in 1967 and were in many ways the heart of the problem in Palestine. But it is an important period, and I think that as we move in history, what's 20 or 30 years ago seemed to us to be contemporary issues become historical. So I think 56 years gives us a different perspective of that period. And I think there's a lot of things that people don't know about 1967, which is very relevant to what goes on today. And I think, as I said, I'm not at all underestimating the importance of what happened in 1948. I just cannot hear myself repeating for the third time why 1948 is relevant to what goes on today. And for those of you who haven't heard the previous two lectures, they are recorded, so you can hear them. And of course, in the QA session, I would be very happy to elaborate, but I think also Dr. Noor gave us, the one reason I decided in the last moment not to go back is because Dr. Noor gave such a comprehensive analysis himself. So I think we do have enough to go on or to build on his own contribution, which is very important and dear to me. The war of 1948, as the Israelis would call it, from their perspective, left them with, and I think Dr. Noor mentioned it, left them with 78% of historical Palestine. They had the power to take the whole of historical Palestine. It was not that Palestinian resistance or Arab resistance prevented the Israeli army to take over the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. In fact, they created the West Bank and the Gaza Strip because it served their perceptions of how much can they take of Palestine and how much should they take of Palestine. Because like every settler colonial movement, and Dr. Noor rightly framed the Zionist project as a settler colonial project, they were interested both in space and in population, in land and demography. So if you take more land of someone else's homeland, you're also getting the people who live there. So you have to weigh your capacity, not just to take over the land by force, but to think, what are you going to do with the people who live on that land? So for all these reasons, they first of all had a very clear agreement with the Jordanian government that in order to neutralize the power of the Jordanian army, which was the only powerful army, Arab army in 1948, in only to neutralize its ability to stop the ethnic cleansing of Palestine, King Abdullah, King Abdullah, the great-grandfather of the present King Abdullah, in those days he was still called the Amir Abdullah, was offered a piece of Palestine in return for a very limited participation in the very late and very limited itself all-Arab attempt to save Palestine from its ethnic cleansing. So the West Bank was taken without one fire shot under an agreement between Israel and Jordan. And Ben-Gurion's reasoning was that if we will take the West Bank, we will add too many Palestinians, and this would be after the so-called war, and we won't have the ability, as he says very clearly in one of the documents, we won't be able to do to them what we did to the rest of the Palestinians. Namely, it would be more difficult to ethnically cleanse the people of the West Bank compared to the way we ethnically cleanse most of the Palestinians who lived in what became Israel. And that's how the West Bank came into being. I talked in my last two presentation on the way that the Gaza Strip was created. I just repeated. Israel again had the power to take the Gaza Strip. There was no serious military force there that could have prevented them. But they decided that because of the Egyptian refusal to open the gates as Syria, Lebanon, and Jordan did for the Palestinians that Israel expelled, they decided to create this very narrow rectangle strip, as they called it, in order to be a receptor for the hundreds of thousands of Palestinians that they have expelled from the central and south of Palestine, which didn't make their way to the West Bank or to the north, but rather to the south and to the west in a way. And that was a decision that, again, Ben-Gurion took almost individually, because his generals were pushing him, by the way, and that is important for the next stage in the story. His young generals pushed him to occupy the West Bank and the Gaza Strip already in 1948, because they said, we have the power to take over the whole of Palestine. But he had this, he was obsessed with demography in that respect, that he thought that the Zionist state reached its capacity in terms of ethnic cleansing, that it won't be able, with the power that it had and with the fact that the fighting subsided, to continue the ethnic cleansing into the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. This is important because since 1948, these young generals created what you can call the lobby of Greater Israel. And they kept pushing him, and he was a very powerful leader in the sense of being the most important decision maker in Israel, until he resigned in many ways from political life in 1963. But until 1963, not only did he object to all the attempts of the army to convince him that Israel had enough opportunities to justify the occupation of the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, and to complete, as they would put it, the job of 1948, he, in fact, was busy thinking, how can he downsize the number of Palestinians who were still inside Israel? So he said, I'm still not sure that we can survive as a Jewish state with the Palestinians who remained within Palestine, what we call today the 48 Arabs, or the Palestinian minority in Israel. And as far as he was concerned, Israel should have expelled them as well. And he was very keen of not giving them citizenship, but there was a kind of a different pragmatic Zionist position that eventually persuaded him to leave the Palestinian minority for all kinds of reasons that I don't have time to go into. And anyway, when in 1963 he resigned from political life, these generals that were part of what I call the Greater Israel Lobby understood that there is now an historical opportunity in their discourse, in their language, to complete the job of 1948. And in 1963, under the guidance of the new prime minister, who replaced David Ben-Gurion, Levi Eshkol, they began planning the occupation of the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. Since 1963, they convened a group of legal experts, military rulers who were ruling the Arab parts within Israel, of course, military generals, academics, and so on, in order to be ready for how to administer and manage the occupation of two areas which they knew were, first of all, highly populated with Palestinians, densely populated with Palestinians, and were densely populated with Palestinian refugees who were already expelled in 1948. So they felt that they need to be strategically prepared for such an event. Why is this so important? Because the narrative that even some friends of Palestine are providing us about 1967 is that the Arab world wanted to destroy Israel, and that's why Israel occupied the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. But the truth is that the 1967 events provided an opportunity for the Greater Israel Lobby to occupy the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. And they always regarded the West Bank as the heart of the Jewish nation, and strategically they thought that the Jordan River was also important, although those of you who have seen the Jordan River would know that it's quite ridiculous to think that it can stop even a soldier, let alone a tank, to cross over. But it sold well in the world that Israel needed a natural barrier on the West Bank. And these preparations are important because it shows that the ethnic cleansing of Palestine that was not completed in terms of population, because half of the Palestinian population still remained in historical Palestine, and was not completed in terms of space, because only 78% of Palestine became Israel, that the strategy of Israel was now very clearly, and this was a consensus strategy of Israel, that let's take the space, despite of Ben-Gurion's warning, let's take the space and we will know what to do with the millions of Palestinians that come with it. And I'll come, in a moment, I will come to their decision, what to do with the Palestinians. But it was very clear that from 63 to 1967, Israel prepared the occupation of the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, believing that without these territories, the Zionist project would not be complete and would not be able to survive. After the occupation of the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, the Israeli government, and this was the 13th Israeli government, which was the most consensual government in Israel history. Almost every political party was represented in that government, the 13th government of Israel, including the Orthodox anti-Zionist parties in Israeli politics. Almost everyone was there. And that government took 3 or 4 decisions with regard to the fate of the territories and the people living in them, that is the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, which are very crucial to what happened later on and what happens today. The first decision, and this was incredible because this decision was actually publicized by the government of Israel And yet, if you go to the State Department website today or the website of the EU, you will see that that very famous Israeli decision of 1967 is not mentioned at all. And what was that decision? That Israel would never give up the West Bank. The Gaza Strip is a different story. We'll come back to this. But Israel could never give up the West Bank, because the West Bank is the heart, as they would call it, the heart of the land of Israel. It's the heart of the land of Israel. And yes, Israel can negotiate the other territories it occupied in 1967, like the Sinai Peninsula, the Golan Heights, but not the West Bank. And this was a consensus between the left and the right. And that's the only decision of the secret decisions, that they actually convened a press conference to announce it, not for the world, for domestic consumption. As I said today to the students in Ann Arbor, they always think that when they announce something in Hebrew, nobody understands it. So it was not published as in English, but it was. You can look at the Israeli newspapers from the 10th and 11th of June. The prime minister has a press conference and he says, we will negotiate about the Sinai, we will negotiate about the Golan Heights, but not about the West Bank. He says this always was part of the Jewish nation, and so on. The second decision, and these were decisions we found in the archives and they didn't publicize at the time. The second decision was, if this is the case, what should we do with the people there? What should be the fate of the people if Israel is going to incorporate the West Bank, and also, at that time, they decided also to incorporate the Gaza Strip? What should be the decision? So one a clear idea that was seriously deliberated was to do what they did in 1948, that is, to ethnically cleanse the people of the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. And there they decided eventually that this was a different historical moment compared to 1948. The war, as you know, was very short, 6 days. There was already television. One expert told them, you know, these are refugees. I'm not sure we will be able that easily to expel refugees for the second time. So for all kinds of consideration, they decided not to expel the people of the West Bank, although one should say Israel expelled 300,000 Palestinians from the West Bank in June 1967. But compared to 1948, it was a relatively small number. So the second plan was, at least let us expel the people of Gaza. And this took a more serious shape. And they were trying to see whether there are people in Gaza who are willing to move to the West Bank or willing to move to Egypt. Then they also tried to bribe people, to give them money to move to Venezuela. This was a different Venezuela in those days. And all these programs did not work. These programs did not work. So they understood that their decision to keep the West Bank and the Gaza Strip with the people in it creates a problem for them, because they are so obsessed with demography. And the question was, what would be the status of the people who live in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip? And the man who led the strategic decision on how the people of the West Bank and the Gaza Strip will be treated from 1967 until today was the Israeli Minister of Defense, Moshe Dayan. And he coined the term. He said, the people of the West Bank and the Gaza Strip would be citizenless citizens. Citizens without citizenship. And even someone like Menachem Begin, who was not a great humanist, he said, this is not humane. We have the stenograms we have the records from the government, so we know what each one of them said. And he said, this is, you know, he felt uncomfortable with this. And Dayan said to him, don't worry, people can live with this for a very long time. And he said, for how long? And Dayan said, well, at least for 50 years. We won't have to worry about this. The next decision was, if you don't get out of the territories and you don't expel the people and you're not going to give them citizenship, although you're going to rule them, you're going to rule them without giving them citizenship. The big question was, how would our great ally, the United States, deal with our decisions? And then and there was born the so-called peace process, which was not the brainchild of the Minister of Defense, but was the brainchild of the Foreign Minister, Abba Eban. He clearly lines up, kind of outlines something that we know in hindsight as historians, but we can see how inventive, in a very negative way, he was. He said there's a difference between peace and a peace process. And I think you know, the rest is history, as they say. And he said, as long as we are committed to the process, it doesn't mean we're committed to peace. And this is what we should tell the Americans. And not only that, he said, let them lead the process. And the Americans fell for it. As, of course, Dr. Nuh said, it also fulfilled their own interest and so on. Of course, the last thing the Americans wanted was for anyone else but the Americans to be involved in the so-called peace process. So you had these actually kind of 4 decisions, very strategic decisions, which you'd notice immediately. One thing is not there, of course, is asking the Palestinians at all to take part in the conversation about their future. But what is incredible about these strategic decisions, that they fed all the Israeli policies from 1967 until today. One of the greatest Israeli success that I'm glad to say can be now regarded as failure, but for many years was a success, was to create the charade as if there is a genuine discussion within the Israeli society, that is the Israeli Jewish society, between a peace camp and what they call the national camp. The peace camp is the one that supports withdrawing from the occupied territories, and the national camp is the one who believes in the greater Israel. Many people fell for it. Quite a lot of Palestinians fell for it, unfortunately. That there was really in the Israeli society a group of people whose support for the withdrawal from the West Bank and the Gaza Strip was an indication for the willing to reconcile, to share the land in an equal way with the Palestinians. This was a charade because both camps were totally in agreement with the strategic decisions of the 13th government of Israel. What they debated was not peace or war. They debated about the tactics. The so-called peace camp that eventually produced the bitter harvest of Oslo believed that an indirect rule of Israel is much better than direct rule. And if you can call the indirect rule a two-state solution, it's even better. And if you can have a Palestinian partner who is willing to help with the indirect rule, it's even better. And then, as Abba Eban said, you have a process that will never end and doesn't lead to anywhere. But you have a process because there's so much to talk about. I cannot imagine to begin and assess the number of academics and journalists who made a life career out of the so-called peace process. In this country alone, there are institutes and think tanks and academic departments and famous journalists whom I will not mention by name, but they're very known to you, who made a life career from the so-called peace process, which was a charade which allowed Israel not only to avoid the withdrawal, but to implement the real plan that they had from the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. And that plan was debated, and we can see this kind of debate today in a much clearer way. There was one group of Israeli leaders and strategists who said the best way to control the West Bank and the Gaza Strip is to Judaize part of the West Bank, part of the Gaza Strip, and enclave the Palestinians in the densely populated area, so you have a Palestinian West Bank and a Jewish West Bank. And you have a Gaza, a Palestinian Gaza, and a Jewish Gaza. And in that way, especially the Supreme Court of Israel, the liberal Jews in Israel, the intellectuals who had this, probably some genuine remorse about some of the things that were happening, would feel better. Namely, we didn't take the land of the Palestinians. We only Judaized land that was mawat, yani, according to the Ottoman law, was not cultivated. It was not cultivated because the Palestinians were kicked out of the land. That's why it was not cultivated. So it was for domestic consumption of the more sensitive, if you want, sections of the Israeli society, the academia, the media, and especially the supporters among the liberal Jews in America and liberal people around the world. It seemed as a reasonable, almost humane, enlightened approach to something that Israel claimed was not its making because they didn't start the 67 war. What could they do? So they had to occupy the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, but they're trying to give autonomy, they're trying to give a way of life to the people there. But of course, where the Palestinians do not live exactly is a land the Palestinians don't need. The Palestinians don't need spaces, they don't need green lungs, they don't need parks. They're very happy to live in a ghettoized community. This was the liberal perspective. This was the liberal perspective. And this is because the Labour Party that controlled Israel until 1977 began very heavy colonization. The first Israeli Jewish settlements in the Gaza Strip and in the West Bank were built by the Israeli left, the same left that committed the ethnic cleansing in 1948. What they didn't take into account, and this is something they didn't plan, that when you start opening this Pandora box of settler colonialism, you can not always control your own demons. And what happened was that a messianic movement that regarded the 67 war in a very different way than the pragmatic Zionists. The pragmatic Zionists had this stages plan. You know, eventually we will take all over Palestine, and we have all kinds of ideas of how to control the Palestinians. But it's all pragmatic, it's all realistic. They didn't take into account that there was a messianic group that said, no, wait a minute, what happened in 67 is God's will. It's a message from God. So we are not just going to settle in empty, which was not empty anyway, but in empty land in the Gaza Strip or in the West Bank. We're going to settle everywhere, including in the heart of the Palestinian cities. Because our map is not a strategic map of settlement, our map is the biblical map. So wherever we think there is a biblical place, the Jews should not only settle there, they should displace the Palestinian and replace them. And one of the most horrific examples for that kind of ideology was implemented, as you know, in the city of Halil, in Hebron, in East Jerusalem, in parts of Nablus. Luckily, it's not that luckily, because Jenin and Tulkarem are also suffering, but they don't seem to appear on the biblical map of the Messianic Jews. But it doesn't matter, because in the end of the day, if both movements of colonization, the practical one and the biblical one, collide, there's not much space for anyone to live in the West Bank, in the Gaza Strip. If you look more carefully in those decisions and think, how did they translate these decisions into reality in the last 56 years? You understand that both the West Bank and the Gaza Strip were run as two mega prisons. In fact, the whole language that the Israeli strategists were using, is the language of prison. It's a language of prison. And they developed kind of two models of prisons for the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. There was, if you want, the open prison. The open prison is if the inmates are collaborating, cooperating, or at least not resisting, they can have certain autonomy in running the prison. They will still be in the prison, and they will still have to accept Jewish colonization and expropriation of land. But if they, quote unquote, behave well, this is a way of life that surely they would appreciate as a blessing, or as the Israelis called it, as an enlightened occupation. If they resist, they will be punished with the second model, the maximum security prison, which will include collective punishment for everyone. And because the Palestinians resisted, they resisted in Gaza in 68 to 69. They resisted in 76 through the municipal elections in the West Bank. They resisted in the first Intifada. They resisted in the second Intifada. The Israeli reaction was, okay, we offered you an open prison, but you misbehaved, and that's why you'll get the maximum security model. What was so unique about the Gaza Strip was that while, unfortunately, one should say, the Israelis eventually were able to pacify, to domicile, if you want, the West Bank after the second Intifada by creating the best ever version they had of the open prison through the Palestinian Authority, through what is called the Quartet, the EU, Russia, the United States, and so on, namely international immunity for that kind of, and call it, Dr. has mentioned before me, President George Bush Jr., and of course, incorporating all these leaders from the West to give their blessing to the open prison that was created, not in Oslo. The one that was created after the second Intifada is far more important than Oslo. The kind of, the agreement that were never publicized. I mean, the agreement of Oslo were publicized. The agreement between Israel and the PA after the end of the second Intifada, which came to an end more or less in April 2002, were never publicized. And these are far more important than the Oslo Agreement. The Oslo Agreement was already dead in 2002. It didn't matter at all what was written there, and it was a terrible document by itself, but it was not the relevant document. The relevant documents are those of April 2002. And that was working for a while. That was working for a while. But it didn't work in the Gaza Strip. The people of Gaza, maybe because 70% of them are refugees, maybe because of a certain history and resilience, or whatever reasons, the Israelis were unable themselves to impose the open prison model on Gaza, and even the maximum security model, namely the collective punishment, did not break the resistance of the people of Gaza. And then they, as you know, they created a third model, which is not even a prison. This is the ghetto, which they built in 2007. The siege, the blockade, collective punishment, which is far worse than any kind of collective punishment they ever did before. And now we have a fourth model, the model of genocide, because everything else is not working. And this is part of the DNA of the Israeli strategic thinking. You have to understand this. They have this kind of gradual thinking of, they try something, it doesn't work, they upgrade the brutality, they upgrade the methodology, and they do something worse because they cannot overcome the resistance and the resilience of the Palestinian people. Now, the election in November 2022 of a government that for the first time in Israel's history represented the messianic Zionism, the most fanatic version ever of Zionism. We never had that before. The election of such a government, first of all, threw out of the window any so-called Zionist pragmatism. So it doesn't exist anymore. So anyone who had the idea of an open prison, of a peace process that goes nowhere. All these kinds of charades that worked for a while, definitely worked with the American policymakers, the Western policymakers, and maybe quite a lot of sections of the civil society as well. They are not interested in the strategic decision that the 13th government of Israel took in June 67. They have a very different perception of the whole situation. They don't care about the international community's reaction. All the governments of Israel before did care about the international reaction. They don't even care about the American position. We can see that. Not that they have to worry about the American position, but they don't care about it. And they are motivated genuinely, one should say, they're motivated genuinely by a sense that God is with them. I wouldn't underestimate their own conviction that they are acting on behalf of their God, of their faith. So it's not just, racism that is doesn't have theological origin and doesn't have ideological origins. So we have to take that into account. They are terrifying not only the Palestinians, they are terrifying large sections of the Israeli Jewish society. But the other side of the Israeli Jewish society that is terrified by them, and that's incredible, and I don't know why this is happening, do not see any connection so far between the way they themselves treated the Palestinians for so many years and that particular group's way of thinking. There's totally disconnect. How did we see it? This group of Israelis, you can call them the secular Israelis, the more progressive Israelis, pragmatic, call them what they want. They're not the messianic Israelis. They went in their hundreds of thousands to the streets of Israel after the elections of November 2022. We really had a kind of a civil war in Israel on a daily basis. 500,000 Israelis were trying to change the result of the November 22 election through demonstrations. And whenever any one of us would go to the organizers of this demonstration and would say, you have to mention the occupation. You have to mention the ethnic cleansing. You have to mention the way the Palestinians are treated. And you have to join forces with the Palestinians in Israel if you want to create a different reality. They totally rejected the idea. They said, no, there's nothing to do with the Palestinians. Nothing to do with the occupation. Nothing to do with the ethnic cleansing. Nothing to do with the oppression. And they really missed the point there, of course. But it's not only the misunderstanding that is incredible. It is the fact that because they do not read the reality correctly, they're going to lose. They're going to lose. And this is the good news. It's bad news. It's the bad news. It's the very bad news that are really good news. I'll explain what I mean for those who didn't understand. Because I really think that the kind of Israel that mesmerized the world, that was able to cheat the world, that created this idea that there's a complex story here, that Israel is a democracy, but it's a democracy that's struggling with terrorism and tries to find a way out of the situation that is not its own making, but these are the circumstances created. That kind of narrative that was very successful. I mean, I'm old enough to know how successful it was in this country. If you read the New York Times in the 1980s, you would think that this is the most reasonable, humane, enlightened position in humanity, the Israeli position on the Palestine question that is so-called subscribed by the Israeli peace camp. Now, and that created the shield of immunity. It was not the only shield of immunity that Israel had. But it's an important shield of immunity. The other shield of impunity is more cynical. This has to do with multinational cooperation, with capitalist interest, with military industry, with oil production, and so on. But there was a double shield. The shield of morality, the shield that seemed to be to have an ethical group of Israelis who are trying really hard to find a way of living together with the Palestinians. That shield has been removed in November 2022. The Israelis are exposed. They're still left with a shield of people who would see them from an Islamophobic point of view, a fascist point of view, a neo-capitalist point of view, as an ally. That neither you nor I have the power to defeat such kind of interests, which are connected to military industries, to making money, and so on. But we have, every one of us, contributed to the removal of the shield of morality that protected Israel. And I think it's bad news because these kinds of people that are now controlling Israel are not going to be satisfied only with genocide in Gaza. They are already eyeing the West Bank. And the next group are the Palestinians inside Israel. They have a clear plan. It's a horrific plan, but don't underestimate their ability to strategize in this racist, fanatic way. Take them seriously, because they still control a powerful army. They still have very strong allies, including in the region. So I wouldn't underestimate the power to inflict more damage. However, the Israel that they will portray, the Israel that they will convey, will help us to make sure that our camp of people with a modicum of decency in them, who will do all they can, not only to stop the genocide in Gaza, to stop the next genocide in the West Bank, to help the Palestinians to liberate their homeland, to allow the refugees to return, to free Palestine from the river to the sea. This kind of camp, which I call Global Palestine, has been given a gift with this kind of Israel. And I say, again, I say it very soberly, because I never know when I sit with Palestinians in the refugee camp in Jenin how to convey this. Or when I talk with my friends in Gaza, who ask me, so what are you saying, that in a year or two this is over? And I say, no, I'm sorry. I wish this, I don't want to be a bearer of false news. No, I think that despite all the great encampments in the United States and all the great movement, they are still very strong. This particular Zionist regime is still very strong, especially towards you, because you don't have an army. You are, and with all the solidarity, people are not coming in their millions to defend you. It's very nice that there are millions who demonstrate for you, but nobody is coming, not one volunteer came to fight with you. So you are facing something that the only thing, and I say it with all the modesty, because you have already been so resilient, because according to the Zionist plan, you were not supposed to be there anymore in 2024. You've been so resilient that I have no doubt that you will survive the next 2 years. And then, in this I also believe, also as a scholar, not just as an activist, I really believe this will begin a very different period, where eventually that kind of Zionism, which maybe is the logical, the logical conclusion of Zionism. Maybe Zionism could only be the kind of Zionism that we see today, that all the rest of it, all the other versions were failed attempt to square the circle. Now we have the real thing. And maybe the real thing was always there, right? So this real thing is not going to be tolerated. This is not going to be tolerated. It will take time before people who can make a difference would translate this intolerance toward that kind of evil into policies, into strategies, but it's an inevitable historical process. I've seen it as historians in so many other places where you had rogue states, you had rogue regimes. They don't survive forever. They don't survive forever. And one thing the Palestinians incredibly have is an ability to survive these terrible chapters in their history And the more we will assist them, the more we will be on their side. We will shorten this period. We will make it as short as possible, and we will provide them with all the help that we can, because they deserve every moment of our energy and commitment. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Pappe. We will move into our Q&A. There are 2 microphones on either side. And so I just kindly remind you to keep your questions concise in respect of everyone and getting as many questions in as we can. We are 8:45 right now. All right, so we will go for 20 minutes. And so we'll start with the right and then go left.
Hello. I think your mic is not. Oh.
I think it's on. Sorry, I just have to get lower. I had 3 questions that are interconnected. One is that last night you mentioned that there are giant cracks in the Israeli regime that will lead to its downfall. So my question is, first of all, in your estimation, what is the timeline that we're potentially looking at? Is it 5 years, 10 years, 20 years? Second is it more going to be a result of the Israeli society tearing itself apart, or will we as international community have an impact on that? And my final question is, what can I do to help the liberation of the Palestinian people? What is the most effective way that I can take action? Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. The first question, I don't have a timeline. I would think of myself as a prophet if I'll give you a timeline, which I'm not. I think that the important thing to think about these cracks, as I call them, is to remember that we are not just onlookers. We're not just observers. We have a role to play to make them, if you want, to accelerate their demise, and help also with others, not just to think about the collapse, but the day after the collapse. What should we have instead of the collapse? One of the major problems of decolonization in Africa, South America, and Southeast Asia is that the collapse was successful, but what was built instead, as we have seen by the many revolutions attempt in the Arab world, was not entirely what the people wanted. So the land was decolonized, but not always the people themselves. So I think that goes together. You don't think just about the collapse. You also, in fact, the collapse is far more productive if you're also thinking of what I want instead of it. And for that, there's no timeline. There's a lot of work to be done. I'll give you one example, and that relates to your second question. Although I think these are discrete processes, namely the implosion of the Israeli society from within, the economic problems of Israel, the international status of Israel, all these things which I think are the cracks in the wall, if you will, the change in the Jewish perceptions of Zionism outside of Israel. All of this, I think a clear Palestinian consensus, Palestinian vision, not of the collapse, how to do the collapse, but what should replace the collapsed structure, would glue together all these processes and give them much more power to change the reality. Because I think part of the hesitation of going into the last phases of bringing down a regime is the fact that nobody is talking in one voice what should be the next regime. And that's very important. That gives a lot of, it gives orientation to people. It gives a compass. We need a compass. And nobody can do this apart from the Palestinians. Only the Palestinians can give us this orientation. And the present political leadership of the Palestinians doesn't seem to have the ability to do this. للأسف. صح? So we hope that this, but I think I'm positive about the next generation. I really think I'm not saying it will not happen. I'm sure it will happen. What can you do from here? I think, you know, unlike I think actually of the lack of vision or the need for more coherent vision, I think actually the solidarity movement, even before the amazing encampments and protests after the 7th of October, knew exactly what to do. I don't think that there is another tricks in my sleeve to tell people here how to show the solidarity in a different way. It's clear that if you do something and you still don't feel the impact, it doesn't mean that what you do is always not right. That's not the only conclusion. Maybe you have to triple your efforts or make them more effective and rethink. It doesn't mean that you have to think again of different things. What I'm trying to say here, that the idea that civil societies, especially in a place like the United States, which is so important for the future, the fact that you want the society to support boycott, the universities to support divestment, and your government to support sanctions, the fact that it's not happening yet doesn't mean that this is not the right way of doing it. That's what I'm trying to say. So let's continue doing it. Let's continue doing it. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. Not to put you on the spot here, but because you're a historian, I'm from Nablus, so where the Palestinian Jews, we call them the Samaritans. This is where the term Good Samaritans came from. Have always had very close relationships with the rest of the Palestinians. My grandfather, before the 1967 occupation, has always told me that very close relationship, same culture, same everything, same. He was actually one of them was actually his business partners for decades. So what is, and this is a specific model for coexistence that has always been there for centuries. What is the role of the indigenous Palestinian Jews in this movement?
Right. First of all, demographically speaking, unfortunately, this is not a very large group. And there are quite interesting academic research on them. And it's a very sad story whenever I read that. Because originally, the indigenous Jews of Palestine rejected Zionism. They fear that Zionism is bringing ideas that A, are against the Jewish tradition and religion, and secondly, that it will undermine the relationship with the other communities. But after the 1948 ethnic cleansing of Palestine, if you want, out of survival, they decided to become Zionists. I can give you a name of one or two or three who didn't, but the vast majority of them were tempted by two things. One is to become the rulers, and unfortunately, maybe that's human nature. They were given the chance of being part of the privileged society and unfortunately contributed to the disaster that Zionism became. And secondly, and this is something not many people don't know, the Jewish European establishment, with no basis whatsoever, it doesn't matter. I don't know if you know that, had a special term for the indigenous Jews in Palestine. They called them in Hebrew, Sfaradim Tehorim, pure Sephardic. What does it mean, pure Sephardic? It means, they said, unlike the Jews, and Dr. Mansour mentioned the ethnic cleansing of the Jews from the Arab world. They said, unlike the Arab Jews, who are a bit Arab, so they're not really like us, they're more inferior, these Jews, they are like us. They're almost like European Jews. So they gave them this idea of a Sephardi Tahor, which immediately included them in the, if you want, if there was an aristocracy, in the Zionist aristocracy. So they were given immediately positions of power that a Jew from Morocco will never get. A Jew from Iraq will never get. A Jew from Yemen definitely will never get. The European Jews had a very famous hierarchy that we discovered, those of us who dealt with this, of who is the most primitive, namely Arab Jew who came to Israel. At the bottom were the Yemenite Jews, at the top were the Iraqi Jews. Again, that had nothing to do with research, that had nothing to do with truth. It was categories of racist European Jews about other Jews. Because if you are a racist movement, you are not only racist towards other people, you're also racist towards your own people. So that particular group lost its ability to play a different role. But who knows, you know, the model you mentioned is the model we're all aspiring to. Bringing back the Jews in historical Palestine to be a community of religious, of Jews who believe in Judaism religiously or not religiously, doesn't matter, who see themselves part of the Jewish people and are willing to live in a state that is based on equality, justice, and freedom, and not on ethnic racism and supremacy. So we have an historical model. Palestine before 1948 was a model of genuine coexistence. The so-called peace process produced a false coexistence. So we will have to go back to that genuine model. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Pappe, for this informative talk. I now actually envy Jewish people because they can speak freely and show their support for Palestine without the fear of being smeared of anti-Semitism. So my question is, what is anti-Semitism? And is this like a specific, there's a specific definition of it, or is it a changing definition according to the circumstances? And who is giving this definition? Is it American Congress? Is it Israel? Is it like European government, or who's exactly? Thank you.
Thank you. First of all, I have to tell you, there is a new definition for Jews who are not Zionists, and that's self-hating Jew. So Jews are also smeared, believe me. Jews who are against Zionism are smeared as much as anyone else. So, let's take that into account, right? So they can't speak freely either. Or they can speak freely either, but will be condemned as well. It's a good question. I mean, the definition of definitions such as anti-Semitism are usually produced in the modern times, at least in the modern times, by academics. Because politicians themselves, after 1948, were consulting academic experts to, especially in Europe, because of the Holocaust. They said, how will we prevent another Holocaust, they would call it, right? And that's where this, and that really fed the whole industry. They put a lot of money, especially in Israeli academia, they allowed, and in the German academia. The German academia and the Israeli academia produced most of the academic words we know today of the definition of who is an anti-Semite. And what the Israelis and the Germans made sure that the older definition of anti-Semitism, namely hating Jews because they are Jews, because of their religion, accusing them of the killing of Christ, you know, all these old ideas, would not be anymore the definition, but it will be connected closely to Israel and Zionism. As good friends of mine used to say, anti-Semitism used to be the hatred of Jews because of who they are. Israel changed anti-Semitism to condemning Jews for what they are doing rather than who they are. And I think this is very important to understand who produces these definitions. So you're right to ask these questions, but we are not helpless. We're not helpless. So we should recruit our academics, our scholars, our experts to challenge these definitions. We should really. I think that a lot of, academic courage is an oxymoron usually. And maybe the civil society and the students have to push them to do that. But that's their role. Their role is, because almost in every society today in the world, places of learning and education are the places which are given the role by their societies to deal with these issues, because most of us have daily businesses that we have to attend to, right? But they are afraid of doing it. They're afraid of doing it. One university after the other in this country and in Europe adopted something which is called the IHRA. The IHRA is a new definition of what the Holocaust denial means. It began as a very benign idea by the Swedish government to educate Swedish people on the Holocaust. It is now it equates criticism of Israel and Zionism with the Holocaust denial. And that's a work of academics that politicians adopted. So let's offer them different definition. Let's tell them that a lot of Semites are not Jews, and that a lot of anti-Semites are Jews as well. So, we have a lot of work to do there. Yeah, sorry, it was long. It's a very dear topic to my mind, so I could go on until the morning on this. Yes, yeah.
Can you hear? Oh, I'm sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to say that we have about 5 minutes left. We may not get through all of our questions, and I apologize for that ahead of time. But I will have to stop at 5. We will have a social gathering downstairs where you will be able to speak with Dr. Pappe or each other, as the case may be. And before we go down, if you have a book that you would like signed, Dr. Pappe will be signing books here before going downstairs. So 5 more minutes with my apologies. Oh, lots of food.
Yeah.
Hi, Ilan.
Hi.
I'm wondering if the world community isolates Israel. Netanyahu said, look, if we have to go it alone, we'll use our fingernails, but we've got more than fingernails. What turn could Zionism take if they're as isolated as South Africa was? When the United States entered that, it was all over. Could the United States do that? Would it do that? Is it in principle possible for the US to say, you're going it alone. You're going it alone. No more. No more money, no more bombs. My worry is what happens to Zionism in that context when they're forced to go it alone?
Yeah. I wouldn't worry about it. That's a good thing. Anyway, I think, you can see the alliance that such a Zionist Israel would maintain. They would have a friend like Urban in Hungary. The neo-right fascist parties in Europe would support them because Zionism and anti-Semitism works very well together. Both of them don't want to see the Jews in Europe. And you will have Modi in India, who would definitely support such an Israel because he has his own version of Zionism, Hinduvuta, in India. They will have, unfortunately, enough rulers, in a way, in the global south and the northern and the global north that would still support them. So they won't have to use the nails. However, you take out, in your scenario, the United States from the equation, economically and militarily, they are in a very, very bad situation. And there are two possible scenarios. Either that will convince at least more of them to change, or it will help the cracks that I was talking about finally to bring down the building. In any case, comes back to my idea that such developments are very dangerous because the main initial victims of them would be the Palestinians, but they're also hopeful because they are opening a space for a different reality. And then the whole struggle, the whole Palestinian struggle would be seen in a very different way, bringing us to that particular moment. Thank you.
So I want to go back to what you were talking about when you were mentioning the difference between the so-called peace camp and the national camp and how that was an illusion. As a historian, when you were looking back at the archives, what phrases or terms highlighted that distinction, that the fact that it was an illusion, and perhaps even giving us a lesson for today, what other phrases or terms should we look out for as that proceeds?
Yeah, I think these are not even phrases. I think these are entries in a vocabulary, in a dictionary. You can look at the so-called Israeli peace camp as something part of a bigger thing, which you can call the peace orthodoxy. The peace orthodoxy is the American Jews who worked in the State Department during the time of Clinton and even before. These are the people who ran the think tanks that produced agreements like the Oslo Agreement and so on. So it's not just in Israel, it's kind of, it's in itself. And their dictionary includes entries that we know exactly what they should be replaced with. I think peace should not be now a word that we should use. I know people love peace. I love peace as well. But what we need in Palestine now is not peace. What we need in Palestine is decolonization, which is not a peaceful thing, but we need it, right? It's not peace. It's not peace. What we need in Palestine is the end of apartheid. The end of apartheid, as we know from South Africa, is not peace. You know, we need to dismantle a political regime that doesn't want to dismantle itself. So how the hell can we do it through peace? So it's not about peace. It's about processes that we are familiar with from history that end oppression. So I think that's one phrase. Anybody talks to you about peace, I would be very worried. I would also be very worried about coexistence. This term has been totally abused. We used to call it the kissing cousin industry. The EU has put $150 million into so-called coexistence people-to-people projects under Oslo between Palestinian and Israelis. This was maybe not intentionally, but what it did, it allowed Israel to run the occupation much cheaply, in a cheaper way than it had to through that money. You know, the only genuine Palestinians who participated in such people-to-people coexistence projects were Palestinian women in Ramallah and Nablus who understood that under this program they can get to this beach in Haifa and enjoy the sea for the first time in their life. So they said, yes, we'll go to this women-to-women meeting. We have to be very careful about these kind of Western concepts of reconciliation and dialogue that do not take into account the balance of power, the imperative. Okay? And again, if I had 2 hours, I would have given you the whole dictionary, but I'm giving you just 2 entries.
I'm sorry that this has to be the.
Huh?
I'm sorry that this has to be the last question. I apologize again, but we can continue the conversation downstairs with refreshments after book signing.
Real quickly, listening to you very carefully, I have a real quick two sentences. One is that in terms of resilience of Palestinians, and you project that hope also, it seems like we, since the time of Canaan, we have a gene called samud, persistence, or whatever it is.
Steadfastness.
We have an infliction, which is God-given to us, which is wonderful. One, two, the infliction the Palestinians have ever since the time of Canaan is persistence and resilience. I just wanted to pass that sentence. Number two is that when Professor Pappe was talking about 2002 accords, which was more dangerous than the 1993 Oslo, actually I think it was Weisglass, his name was. Now it's time for us to talk about peace process. We are going to negotiate with Palestinians till they become Finns, from Finland, in other words. Yeah. That was how the differentiation between peace and peace process. I wanted to just share that with you out loud.
Thank you very much.
My question is this, real quickly. You brushed over the resilience of the Gaza people in the 2002, from 2000 to 2002 uprising, and that is, you said, well, the open air prison, the Gaza was different because although the maximum security prison, you didn't allude to why it was an exception. I wanted to just share with you the specificity of Gaza at the time was Israeli arming Hamas in order to undermine the PLO. That helped. I'm not blaming the Israelis for my courage, my people's courage. I am talking about that became a catalyst in Gaza, differentiating it from the West Bank, having Gaza then become different kind of struggle than the West Bank. I just want to share that out loud and see if you agree with that or not. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah, yes, I think that it's a very good analysis. So I think it's a very valid analysis, definitely. And I think that we can still go on researching it a bit because it's really an incredible phenomenon. Also, you have to take into account that with all the messianic movement of Israel, they only succeeded of persuading 3,500 Jews to settle in Gaza. And they succeeded in moving 700,000 Jews to settle in the West Bank. This is also a factor that has to, without undermining what you have said. I think that this messianic movement had its own priorities when it comes to the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. But even that has changed now. They're talking now about the Gaza Strip as they talk about the West Bank. So we are into a difficult time. Sorry. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Pappe.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
If you don't mind, I just have a quick announcement to make. My name is Dr. Nidal Jabour. I'm the co-founder of a new organization called Doctors Against Genocide. This is a Palestinian-led organization, and the Palestinians found it's their obligation to found this because the world have left them. It is my duty not to let this day go by without recognizing the Nakba as such and giving it its full recognition as a genocide. The Nakba was a genocide. The genocide actually started in 1987 when they said land without people, for people without land. They erased us at that time. We knew their intentions. The Nakba meets all the criteria of the genocide. There was the very well documented intent that I learned from Dr. Pappe's books. There was the organization, the planning, the militias, the gangs, and there was the crime of the Nakba, which is the mass killing, more than 15,000 Palestinians, the mass expulsions, more than 700,000, mass destruction, mass rape, massacres. All these are the elements of genocide. The world let the Palestinians down. They lied to us. They made us believe that this was an act of war, an accident of war, which was not. It was an act of well-planned and perpetrated genocide. The only reason the Nakba has been going on since then is because we failed, and the world failed to recognize it as such. If it was recognized as a genocide, and if the perpetrators were held accountable, we would not have been here going into another genocide and an ongoing genocide since 1948. Actually, I have been warning about that in the last 4 years. After 1 year trying with 5,000 Israelis and American Jews to make peace, I realized, I made a conclusion that there is no way we can make peace. They are not there for peace. They are there, all of them, even the pro-peace ones, is for expulsion and annihilation, getting rid of the Palestinian people. Actually, I was so worried about reading genocide books about the genocide that I had a Zoom meeting with this young lady here, Krista. There was a Zoom meeting with Krista and Francisca Albanese, August 2023, 2 months before Gaza. And she was talking about occupation, apartheid, and I told her, this is all going on because we are not recognizing the genocide. Mrs. Albanese at that time said, I promised to read more about it. And unfortunately, we were supposed to send her some information, but October 7 came and we did not get the chance to do it. So please recognize the Nakba as Nakba genocide. It's not just a catastrophe. It's not a natural disaster. It was a genocide. The perpetrators then and the perpetrators now need to be held accountable. We do have a conference against the century of genocide in Gaza coming up this Saturday in Dearborn at the Civic Center. Please visit our website, doctorsagainstgenocide.org, to learn more information about it and register. And again, the Palestinians are going forward, they are going to claim their pain, own their pain, and they are the one who are going to decide what is the type and the crime that was conflicted about them and what resolution they demand. Thank you.
Okay, before everyone leaves, and I think I'm a little late to the party, but if you would just give me one moment, we have one final closing ceremony. So Rabbi Alana Alpert is the rabbi for Congregation Tekiah here at I sent a text to Rabbi Alpert, and all I said was, do we have a venue for Dr. Pappe? And she immediately jumped and helped organize this event. It would not have been possible without her leadership. So with that, I want to hand over the mic to Rabbi Alpert to close our ceremony.
Thank you, Dr. Sachi. Thank you. Thank you to everyone for being here tonight. Thank you for everything you're doing. I want to offer an invitation, a blessing, and a prayer. The invitation is if anyone on your way out would like to visit our sanctuary, we're a synagogue within this beautiful church, right down the hall. I'll be hanging out there, can give you a tour of our little space. Would love to welcome you. We're going to go break bread together. Let's bless. I'll bless from my tradition the food and all of the forces that conspired to bring this amazing food. I've seen it downstairs. I already snuck a cookie, to be honest. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam hamotzi lecha min haaretz. Amen. And the prayer, since we are in a house of prayer, it won't be for peace. In Hebrew we say shalom, in Arabic salam. The root of the word is not just peace, it's also wholeness. And I think that's one of the things that we're learning tonight is we're looking at the whole picture, right? And that is what we pray for a whole healing, for wholeness, to come to the region, for safety and freedom for everyone between the river and the sea. And I'll use again the ancient words from my tradition. Oseh shalom bimromav, uyaseh shalom aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael, ve'al kol yoshvei tevel, ve'imru imru, amen. May the one who brings wholeness above help us to actualize wholeness down below, and let us say amen. Thank you so much for being here.
One more minute, if you don't mind. Good evening. My name is Abbas Youssef. I'm the secretary of Al-Nadwa Free Thinking Society. This concludes Dr. Ilan Pappe's speaking tour in the Detroit area. It's an honor for me to be a part of the team that thought of and planned this visit of our friend and brother in humanity, Professor Pappe. We are very appreciative of Dr. Pappe making the trip to promote rich discussion across diverse communities of color, faith, and political spectrum, addressing the continued occupation and genocide of the Palestinian people by the Zionist regime. I would like to thank the coalition we have built to make this tour successful: the Jewish Voice for Peace Detroit, the Palestinian Youth Movement, the Peace Action of Michigan, Friends of Sabil North America, Bint Jbeil Cultural Center, the Unitarian Universalist Church of Detroit, Congregation Taqiyya Synagogue, and here in this beautiful and welcoming space, the First United Methodist Church. The people of these organizations realize the importance of supporting a cause of the magnitude of the liberation of Palestinians from their occupation and continued genocide. I would like to extend our thanks to the people who made this event a success, starting with Dr. May Saikali, Dr. Krista Braun, Dr. Layla Sachi, Nabil Sater, Suhair Ghannam, Dr. David Pitts, Reverend Peacock, Reverend Julie Brock, Pastor Witherly, Nada Noor, Rabbi Alaina Alkart, Rasha Al-Mulaiki, and everyone of Al-Nadwa Free Thinking Society Executive Board. Special thanks to Aladdin Restaurant in Lansing, Masri Sweets in Dearborn, and Beat Books in Oak Park. Of course, you may be surprised I did not mention one name yet that I greatly appreciate and humbly recognize. Throughout the planning process of the last few weeks, I gained a new sister. Please come, please come. I gained a new sister who offered great support to make this tour a success. Our sister, Barbara Bearfield from the Jewish Voice for Peace. From the leadership of the Jewish Voice for Peace Detroit. Many thanks to all who contributed any level of donations and or volunteered their time and effort. Lastly, events like this are only made possible through the care and dedication of each and every one of you. humanity will prevail.